Zephyrian fleet had traveled across 17 star systems, their crystalline ships cutting through the void with the silent grace of cosmic predators. For 3 millennia, they had been the undisputed masters of their corner of the galaxy, their technology so advanced that entire civilizations had surrendered at the mere sight of their vessels. Materializing in orbit, the Zephyrians possessed energy shields that could deflect stellar radiation, weapons that could crack planets in half, and minds that could process information at speeds that made quantum computers seem sluggish. Admiral Keffer stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion, his 6 arms crossed behind his back as he gazed at the holographic display, showing their latest discovery. The 3rd planet from this unremarkable yellow star had been broadcasting electromagnetic signals for barely a century, a cosmic eye blink. Intelligence reports suggested the inhabitants had only recently discovered nuclear fission and were still confined to their single world, with primitive chemical rockets that barely reached their own moon. "Another primitive species," muttered Commander Yixtel, her silver skin shimmering with disdain. "Shall we proceed with standard pacification protocols, Admiral?" Keffer's primary eyes narrowed as he studied the data streams. The planet's inhabitants, they called themselves humans, had been detected through their crude radio transmissions. The Zephyrian analysts had easily decoded their languages, studied their entertainment broadcasts, and concluded that these humans were a fractured species, divided into hundreds of tribal nations, constantly warring among themselves with projectile weapons and explosive devices that seemed almost comically primitive. Curious, Keffer mused, his secondary arms manipulating the holographic controls to zoom in on the planet's surface. They possess nuclear weapons but haven't unified their species. They've had this technology for less than a century and haven't destroyed themselves yet. Perhaps they show promise. The bridge fell silent except for the low hum of the ship's consciousness-driven systems. The Zephyrians had encountered thousands of species across the galaxy, and the pattern was always the same. Primitive civilizations would detect the arrival of the fleet, panic, launch their most powerful weapons in desperate futility, and then surrender when those weapons proved utterly ineffective against Zephyrian technology. The conquered species would then be absorbed into the Empire, their unique biological and cultural traits cataloged and preserved, their worlds transformed into productive nodes. In the vast Zephyrian network, Admiral, announced Navigator Kelthara, from her station, her voice carrying the musical tones of her caste. "We're receiving multiple transmission bursts from the planet's surface. They appear to be mathematical sequences, prime numbers, followed by what seems to be attempts at pictographic communication." Keffer's interest sharpened. Most species tried to hide when they detected the fleet's approach, or immediately launched attacks. Very few attempted communication. Display the transmissions. The holographic array shifted, showing waves of radio signals pulsing from various points on the planet's surface. The signals were crude by Zephyrian standards, but they carried an unmistakable pattern, deliberate, structured, purposeful. The humans were trying to talk. "Fascinating," Keffer murmured. "They're not cowering or attacking. They're trying to establish contact." He paused, his four primary eyes focusing on different data streams simultaneously. "Initiate standard first contact protocols. We shall observe their response to our presence before proceeding." What the Zephyrians didn't know, what their advanced sensors and superior intellects had failed to detect, was that humanity's fractured nature was not a weakness, it was their greatest strength. While other species had developed along singular paths, becoming highly specialized, but ultimately limited, humans had evolved to be adaptable, unpredictable, and capable of thinking in ways that defied conventional logic. The first sign that this encounter would be different came when the human transmissions suddenly shifted. Instead of the panicked, chaotic signals the Zephyrians expected, the communications became more organized, more purposeful. Radio telescopes and deep space monitoring stations across Earth were working in unprecedented coordination, sharing data and resources in ways that their fragmented governments had never achieved before. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the director of the Arecibo Observatory, stared at her screens in amazement. "They're not just observing us," She whispered to her colleague. "They're waiting. It's like they want to see what we'll do." "What do you mean?" asked Dr. Chen, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he analyzed the alien signals. "Look at the pattern." Elena pointed to the holographic display. "They transmitted once, a simple mathematical sequence. We responded with prime numbers. They acknowledged our response, but didn't escalate. They're giving us time to figure out how to communicate properly." Unknown to the Zephyrians, this delay was being used by humanity in ways that would have seemed impossible to any other species they had encountered. Within hours of the first contact, every major government on Earth had been briefed. Within days, the world's greatest minds were working together in ways that transcended national boundaries, religious differences, and political ideologies. The threat of extinction had done what centuries of diplomacy could not. It had unified the human race. But the most significant development was happening in the deepest levels of classified military installations around the world. While scientists worked on communication protocols and linguists struggled to decode alien languages, military strategists were doing what humans had always done best. They were preparing for war. Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Coalition stood before a holographic display showing orbital tracking data. "Are you telling me," she said slowly, "that these alien ships are just sitting there, not moving, not scanning, just maintaining position?" "Yes, Admiral," replied her intelligence officer. "They appeared 6 days ago, took up positions throughout the solar system, transmitted once, and then nothing. They're waiting." "Waiting? For what?" "We believe they're waiting for us to respond in a way that meets their expectations. Every species they've encountered before has followed a predictable pattern: panic, attack, surrender. We're not following that pattern." Admiral Chen's eyes hardened. "What do we know about their military capabilities? Based on our observations, their technology is centuries, possibly millennia ahead of ours. Their ships show no visible propulsion systems, no heat signatures, no energy expenditure. They're operating on principles we don't understand with power sources we can't detect. And their weaknesses, unknown. But Admiral, there's something else. Something the scientists don't know yet." The intelligence officer's voice dropped to a whisper. "We've detected similar encounters with other species throughout the galaxy. Every time, the pattern is the same. The aliens arrive, the species resists, the species is absorbed into their empire. Every time, until now." Admiral Chen stared at the holographic display, her mind racing. "They're not just waiting for us to respond. They're waiting for us to behave like every other species they've encountered. They expect us to panic, to attack with everything we have, and then to surrender when we realize we're outmatched." "Yes, Admiral. But what if we don't? Then we write our own ending to this story." Admiral Chen's voice carried a note of grim determination. "Initiate Protocol 7. It's time to show these aliens what makes humanity different." As the Zephyrian fleet maintained their positions throughout the solar system, confident in their overwhelming superiority and experienced in the ways of first contact, they had no idea that they were about to encounter something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about conquest, about intelligence, and about the nature of strength itself. The humans were not preparing to surrender. They were preparing to teach the galaxy's greatest predators what it meant to be prey. Section 2. The deception Protal 7 had been theoretical until now. A desperate gambit conceived by human military strategists who understood that conventional warfare against an advanced alien civilization would be suicide. The protocol was based on humanity's greatest military asset, not their weapons, not their technology, but their capacity for deception, misdirection, and psychological warfare on a scale that no other species had ever conceived. Admiral Chen stood in the war room buried 3 miles beneath the Colorado mountains, surrounded by representatives from every major military power on Earth. The Chinese General Liu Wei sat beside Russian Admiral Petrov, while British Air Marshal Davies consulted with Israeli intelligence chief Rebecca Goldstein. The irony was not lost on anyone. It had taken an alien invasion to achieve what diplomats had failed to accomplish for centuries. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Chen began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. we are about to commit the most audacious act of military deception in human history. We're going to make the most advanced civilization in the galaxy believe that we are exactly what they expect us to be, a primitive, panicked species that will follow their predicted behavioral patterns. General Liu Wei leaned forward, his weathered face grim. The psychological profiles suggest they've conquered thousands of worlds. Using the same methodology, they arrive, display overwhelming force, wait for the inevitable resistance, then crush it to demonstrate their superiority. After that, surrender is inevitable. But what if we give them exactly what they expect? Added Air Marshal Davies. But not in the way they expect it. Admiral Chen activated the holographic display, showing the current positions of both human and alien forces. For the past week, we've been broadcasting surrender negotiations, peace overtures, and desperate pleas for mercy. Our acting has been adequate. The aliens believe we're a fractured species trying to achieve unity in the face of extinction. They think our military preparations are the desperate flailing of a primitive civilization. Rebecca Goldstein smiled coldly. What they don't know is that every desperate military movement they've observed has been carefully choreographed. Every weapons system they've cataloged, every defense installation they've noted, every piece of technology they've analyzed, it's all a carefully constructed lie. The truth was staggering in its scope. While the aliens had been monitoring what they believed were humanity's military preparations, they had actually been observing the greatest deception operation in human history. The primitive nuclear weapons they had detected were decoys. The chaotic military communications they had intercepted were scripted performances. The panicked evacuation of major cities was actually the repositioning of critical assets to locations the aliens couldn't detect. Show them the real preparations, Admiral Chen commanded. The holographic display shifted, revealing the true scope of human activity. Deep beneath the ocean floors, massive construction projects had been completed in record time. Asteroid mining, operations that the aliens had dismissed as primitive resource gathering, had actually been camouflaged weapons manufacturing. The International Space Station, seemingly abandoned and drifting, was actually the control center for a network of stealth satellites that the aliens' sensors couldn't detect. My God, whispered Admiral Petrov, seeing the full scope of the operation for the first time. How did we manage to hide all of this? The same way we've hidden every major military operation in human history, replied Admiral Chen. We showed them what they expected to see, and we made sure they never looked where they shouldn't. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as the scientific liaison to the military command, stepped forward. The aliens' overconfidence is their greatest weakness. They've been studying our communications, our culture, our technology, but they've been studying the version of humanity we wanted them to see. They think they understand us, but they've never encountered a species that could deceive on this scale, because no other species has ever needed to, added General Liu Wei. Every other civilization they've encountered developed in isolation, became highly specialized, and fought them directly. We're the first species they've met that evolved from predators who learned to hunt other predators. The psychological implications were staggering. While other species had developed advanced technology and unified governments, humanity had evolved something far more dangerous: the ability to think like their enemies, to anticipate their moves, and to manipulate their perceptions. Every war in human history had been a laboratory for developing these skills. And now they were about to be tested on a galactic scale. Phase 1 of Protocol 7 is complete, Admiral Chen announced. The aliens believe they understand our capabilities, our psychology, and our inevitable response patterns. They're positioned exactly where we want them. They're prepared for exactly the kind of resistance we want them to expect. And they're completely unaware of our true capabilities. And Phase 2, asked Air Marshal Davies. Admiral Chen's expression grew darker. Phase 2 is when we show them that humans don't just fight to win. We fight to make sure our enemies never want to fight us again. Meanwhile, aboard the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Keffer was reviewing the latest intelligence reports with growing satisfaction. The humans were behaving exactly as predicted. Their initial attempts at communication had given way to military posturing. Their governments were struggling to coordinate a unified response. and their weapons technology was primitive by Zephyrian standards. Status report, he commanded, his four primary eyes focusing on different data streams simultaneously. The humans have activated what appear to be their primary defense systems. Reported Commander Yixtal, nuclear weapons platforms, orbital defense satellites, and atmospheric fighter aircraft. Their most advanced warships are primitive fusion-powered vessels that pose no threat to our shields, and their psychological profile, consistent with previous encounters. Initial curiosity has given way to fear, then to desperate military preparation. They're following the standard pattern. They'll launch a coordinated attack within the next 72 hours, realize the futility of resistance, and then begin surrender negotiations. Admiral Keffer nodded, his secondary arms manipulating the holographic controls. Curious that they've managed to achieve this level of coordination, despite their fractured nature. Perhaps they're more adaptable than we initially assessed. Adaptable? Yes, agreed Commander Yixtal, but still primitive. Their deception attempts are almost endearing. They've tried to hide some of their weapons systems, created false communication channels, and even attempted to relocate some of their leadership. It's exactly what we'd expect from a species that's never encountered superior technology. What the Zephyrians didn't realize was that their own superiority was being used against them. Their advanced sensors were detecting exactly what humanity wanted them to detect. Their psychological profiles were accurate assessments of carefully crafted performances. Their strategic analysis was based on deliberately misleading data. Admiral, announced Navigator Kalthara, we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It appears to be a formal communication from their unified government. Display it. The holographic array showed a human woman in military uniform, her face stern but composed. When she spoke, her words were transmitted simultaneously in dozens of human languages, but the Zephyrian translation systems easily converted the message into their native tongue. I am Admiral Sarah Chen, speaking on behalf of the United Earth Defense Coalition. We have studied your technology, analyzed your capabilities, and prepared our response. We know we cannot match your ships in direct combat, but we will not surrender without a fight. We propose a formal engagement, your fleet against our best warships, to determine the fate of our species. Admiral Keffer's interest was piqued. How refreshingly direct. Most species try to negotiate for more time or plead for mercy. These humans are actually challenging us to combat. It's almost certainly a trap, warned Commander Yixtal. They must have some weapon system they believe can damage our ships. Perhaps, mused Admiral Keffer. But what could a species that has barely achieved interplanetary travel possibly possess that could threaten us? No. I believe this is simply their way of maintaining dignity in the face of inevitable defeat. We shall indulge them. The Admiral's decision would go down in Zephyrian history as the moment when the galaxy's greatest predators walked willingly into the most sophisticated trap ever conceived by any species in known space. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon was not any device or technology, but their ability to make their enemies believe they understood them. Right up until the moment when they realized they understood nothing at all. The engagement was scheduled for the space between Earth and Mars, a region the Zephyrians had designated as optimal for demonstrating their overwhelming superiority. Admiral Keffer had selected only a fraction of his fleet for the encounter, 12 crystalline warships, against what appeared to be humanity's entire space-capable military force. It seemed almost unfair, but the Admiral understood the psychological importance of allowing the humans to commit their best forces before their inevitable defeat. What emerged from Earth's orbital shipyards defied every expectation. The Zephyrians had formed about human technology. The human fleet was not the collection of primitive fusion-powered vessels their sensors had detected. Instead, sleek warships unlike anything in the Zephyrian databases moved with impossible grace through the void, their hull designs suggesting propulsion systems that shouldn't exist given humanity's apparent technological level. Admiral, Commander Yixtal's voice carried a note of confusion. The human vessels are not matching our sensor readings. These ships appear to be using gravitic manipulation drives, quantum entangled communication systems, and what looks like temporal displacement fields. Admiral Keffer's primary eyes focused intently on the tactical display, Impossible. Our intelligence indicated they had barely achieved fusion power. How could they have developed such advanced technology without our detection? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now aboard the human flagship UES Defiance, smiled grimly as she monitored the alien communications her team had been intercepting and decoding for weeks. Because, she whispered to Admiral Chen, they never bothered to look beyond their own assumptions. The truth was both simpler and more complex than the aliens could have imagined. Humanity had not developed advanced technology in secret. They had developed something far more dangerous. They had learned to think beyond the limitations that constrained every other species in the galaxy. Admiral Chen came the voice of Dr. James Morrison, the theoretical physicist who had made the breakthrough that changed everything. All systems are showing green. Project Lazarus is online and ready for implementation. Project Lazarus was the culmination of human ingenuity applied to a problem that had seemed insurmountable. Faced with an enemy whose technology was centuries ahead of their own, humanity had done something no other species had ever attempted. They had stopped trying to match alien technology and had instead focused on breaking the rules that governed it. The Zephyrians operate under the assumption that certain physical laws are absolute. Dr. Morrison had explained to the assembled military leaders weeks earlier. They've built their entire civilization around technologies that work within those parameters. But what if we refuse to accept those limitations? The human warships approaching the Zephyrian formation were not advanced in the traditional sense. They were something far more dangerous. They were impossible, using principles that violated everything the Zephyrians understood about physics, engineering, and the nature of reality itself. Humanity had created vessels that existed in a state of controlled impossibility. Initiate phase 3, Admiral Chen commanded, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. Show them what happens when prey becomes predator. The first sign that something was wrong came when the human ships simply stopped obeying the laws of physics. They accelerated without visible propulsion, changed direction without momentum transfer, and began occupying multiple positions simultaneously. The Zephyrian sensors, designed to track and analyze any known form of technology, could only register error messages as they tried to process what they were observing. This is impossible. Admiral Keffer breathed, his secondary arms working frantically at the controls. No species can violate the fundamental laws of spacetime. It's what happens when you underestimate a species that evolved by breaking rules. Came a voice from the Zephyrian communication system. Admiral Chen's image appeared on their screens, but she was speaking in perfect Zephyrian, using linguistic patterns that should have been impossible for any human to master. You've been studying us for weeks, Admiral Chen continued, her words carrying implications that made the Zephyrian bridge crew recoil in shock. But you never asked the right question. You wanted to know what we could do. You should have asked what we would do. The revelation hit the Zephyrian command structure like a physical blow. The humans had not just been hiding their true capabilities. They had been studying the Zephyrians with the same intensity that the aliens had been studying them. Every communication, every sensor scan, every tactical movement had been analyzed, decoded, and understood by minds that refused to accept the limitations that governed every other species in the galaxy. You see, Admiral Chen's image flickered as the human ships began their attack. Every species you've encountered before developed along predictable paths. They became specialized, efficient, and ultimately limited by their own success. But humans evolved to survive in a world where everything was trying to kill us. We learned to adapt, to improvise, and to find solutions that nobody else would ever think to look for. The human attack was unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever encountered. Their ships didn't fire weapons. They became weapons, vessels that had been solid matter one moment became pure energy the next, passing through Zephyrian shields as if they didn't exist, then rematerializing inside the alien ships themselves. The humans weren't just fighting, they were rewriting the rules of warfare on a fundamental level. Shield integrity compromised, reported the Zephyrian tactical officer, his voice shaking with disbelief. The human weapons they're not weapons. They're altering the quantum structure of our hull materials. Our ships are being converted into something else. Admiral Keffer watched in horror as his flagship's crystalline hull began to change. Its perfect geometric structure, becoming fluid, organic, almost alive. "What are they doing to us? They're not destroying us," whispered Commander Yixtel, her silver skin paling as she realized the truth. They're transforming us, making us like them." The psychological impact was devastating. For 3 millennia, the Zephyrians had conquered through demonstrations of superior technology and overwhelming force. They had never encountered a species that could not only match their capabilities, but could fundamentally alter the nature of those capabilities. The humans weren't just winning. They were proving that everything the Zephyrians believed about technology, about warfare, about the nature of existence itself, was wrong. "We surrender." Admiral Keffer's voice broke as he transmitted the message he had never expected to send. We surrender. Please, stop this. We'll withdraw from your system. We'll leave your species alone. No." Admiral Chen's reply cut through the Zephyrian pleas like a blade. "You don't understand. This isn't about our system. This isn't about our species. This is about every species you've ever conquered, every world you've ever absorbed, every civilization you've ever destroyed in your march across the galaxy." The true scope of humanity's plan became clear as more human ships materialized throughout the solar system, not just dozens, but hundreds, then thousands. Ships that had been hidden not just from Zephyrian sensors, but from reality itself, existing in states of quantum superposition until they were needed. "You wanted to know what makes humans different," Admiral Chen continued, her image now appearing on every Zephyrian ship simultaneously. "We're the first species you've encountered that doesn't just fight for survival. We fight for justice. And we've been waiting for someone like you to show us what justice looks like on a galactic scale." The Zephyrian fleet, the terror of 17 star systems, the unstoppable force that had conquered thousands of worlds, found themselves not just defeated but fundamentally changed. Their ships were no longer purely alien. They were becoming something new, something that embodied both human creativity and Zephyrian technology, but followed neither species' limitations. "What have you done to us?" Admiral Keffer's voice was barely a whisper. "We've given you what you gave every other species," Admiral Chen replied, and for the first time, her voice carried a note of compassion. "We've shown you what it means to be transformed by a superior force. The difference is, we're not going to destroy you. We're going to give you the chance to choose what comes next." The choice would reshape the galaxy, but the Zephyrians were no longer the ones making it. For the first time in their civilization's history, they were about to learn what it meant to be at the mercy of another species' vision of the future. 6 months after the battle that shattered the Zephyrian Empire's 3,000-year reign of conquest, Admiral Keffer stood on the observation deck of what had once been his flagship. The Eternal Dominion had been transformed into something unprecedented, a vessel that was simultaneously Zephyrian and human, incorporating the crystalline beauty of alien engineering with the impossible adaptability of human innovation. It was no longer a ship of war, but something entirely new, a ship of possibilities. The psychological adjustment has been challenging, Keffer admitted to Admiral Chen as they watched the construction of the first joint human Zephyrian colony ship in Earth's orbit. His four primary eyes had learned to express emotions that his species had never experienced before: humility, wonder, and something that humans called hope. "My people have spent millennia believing we were the apex of galactic evolution. Learning that we were merely limited has been devastating for many." Admiral Chen nodded, her expression carrying a mixture of satisfaction and concern. "We never wanted to break your people, Admiral. We wanted to free them. There's a difference, though I understand it might not feel that way from your perspective." The transformation had indeed been profound. The Zephyrian Empire, built on the principle of technological superiority and conquest, had crumbled not through destruction but through revelation. When humanity had demonstrated that the laws governing technology and physics were merely suggestions that could be creatively interpreted, it had fundamentally altered how the Zephyrians viewed their place in the universe. "The reports from the liberated worlds are extraordinary," Keffer continued, his secondary arms manipulating a holographic display that showed the former Zephyrian territories. Species that had been absorbed into our empire for centuries are rediscovering their own capabilities. The Altarians have developed art forms that exist in 11 dimensions. The Regelians have created music that can be heard through quantum entanglement. The vegan colonies have. They're becoming themselves again. Admiral Chen finished. That was always the plan. You didn't just conquer their worlds. You convinced them that their own ways of thinking were inferior. Once they realized that wasn't true, they started exploring possibilities that even we hadn't imagined. The liberation of the Zephyrian Empire had unleashed a renaissance of creativity and innovation across 17 star systems. Species that had been forced to conform to Zephyrian technological paradigms were discovering that their own unique approaches to problem solving could lead to breakthroughs that transcended anything either humans or Zephyrians had achieved alone. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as the director of the Galactic Cooperation Initiative, joined them at the observation window. The Cetacean Collective just transmitted their latest discoveries, she announced, her voice filled with excitement. They've found a way to communicate with quantum vacuum fluctuations. They're literally talking to empty space, and it's talking back. Impossible, Kethfer said automatically, then caught himself. Highly improbable given conventional understanding of quantum mechanics. You're learning. Admiral Chen smiled. That's what we hoped would happen, not just with your people, but with every species that had been convinced there was only one way to understand the universe. The transformation hadn't been without its challenges. Some Zephyrian hardliners had attempted to resist the changes, launching desperate attacks against the hybrid fleets that now patrolled former Empire space. But these rebellions had been met not with conventional military force, but with something far more devastating. They had been met with kindness, understanding, and the patient demonstration that there were better ways to exist. Commander, Yixtal has requested permission to lead the expedition to the Andromeda Galaxy, Kethfer reported, his tone carrying a note of pride. She believes that our new understanding of reality might allow us to establish communication with the intelligence network that the radio telescopes detected there. Admiral Chen raised an eyebrow, the same Commander Yixtal who called humans primitive and endearing in their deception attempts, the same. Kethfer admitted with what humans would recognize as embarrassment. She has evolved. We all have. The realization that our conception of advancement was actually a limitation has been liberating. The greatest revelation had come not from any single technological breakthrough, but from the gradual understanding that consciousness itself was far more flexible than any species had imagined. The Zephyrians had developed incredible processing power but had used it to follow rigid patterns of thought. Humans had less raw computational ability, but had learned to think in ways that transcended logical limitations. When these approaches were combined, the results were literally mind-expanding. There's something else, Dr. Vasquez said quietly. The deep space monitoring arrays have detected something that makes our first contact with the Zephyrians look like a minor diplomatic incident. Both admirals turned to face her, their expressions serious. We're not alone, she continued. We knew that already, but there's something else out there, something that's been watching the entire galaxy, waiting to see what would happen when two incompatible forms of consciousness tried to coexist. The holographic display shifted, showing sensor readings from the edge of the galaxy. The signals were unlike anything they had encountered, not technological, not biological, but something that existed in the spaces between conventional categories of existence. They're older than the Zephyrians, Dr. Vasquez explained, older than any species we've encountered, and they're approving. The signals carry emotional content that suggests satisfaction, even joy. It's as if they've been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Admiral Kethfer's primary eyes focused on the display with growing amazement. They were testing us, not just humans, not just Zephyrians, but the entire galaxy. They wanted to see if we could move beyond the cycle of conquest and subjugation that has defined galactic civilization, and we passed, Admiral Chen said softly, not by being the strongest or the most advanced, but by proving that cooperation and transformation were possible even between the most incompatible species. The implications were staggering. The galaxy was not just a collection of competing civilizations struggling for dominance. It was a testing ground, a laboratory for consciousness itself to explore new possibilities for existence. The encounter between humans and Zephyrians had been the catalyst for a transformation that would reshape not just their two species, but the entire nature of what it meant to be alive in the universe. "So what happens now?" Kethver asked, his voice filled with wonder. Admiral Chen smiled, her expression carrying the same mix of determination and hope that had driven humanity to attempt the impossible. "Now we find out what the universe looks like when every species is free to become what they were always meant to be. We explore possibilities that none of us have ever imagined, and we prepare for whatever comes next." As they watched the construction of the first truly cooperative galactic civilization, both admirals understood that their confrontation had been just the beginning. The real adventure, the exploration of consciousness, reality, and the infinite, possibilities that existed beyond the limitations of any single species' imagination, was just beginning. The galaxy would never be the same, but then again, that had always been the point. In the end, the Zephyrians had been brought to their knees not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by the revolutionary idea that limitations were choices, not laws, and in learning to see beyond those limitations, they had discovered that the universe was far stranger, far more wonderful, and far more full of potential than they had ever dared to imagine. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, as if the cosmos was celebrating the dawn of a new age of possibility.